The vastness of space stretched out in all directions, silent and cold. Far beyond the edge of the known galaxy, a signal flickered weakly, struggling to break through the infinite emptiness. It was faint, barely audible, filled with static and fragments of a voice begging for help. But the message wasn't for just anyone. It was a cry from a doomed fleet, a fleet whose survival was hanging by a thread. The Virelian fleet, once a powerful force feared across the stars, now found themselves at the mercy of a dying star and an ancient enemy, the Tralzians. The ship's systems were barely functional, and with each passing moment, their chances of survival grew slimmer. The message first reached the Aegis, a small human outpost on the edge of explored space, a place far from the politics and power struggles of the galaxy's core. Commander Lion Graves sat in her chair, her eyes scanning the glowing screen in front of her. She had been on duty for hours, overseeing routine transmissions and monitoring the safety of her crew. But this signal, this wasn't routine. As soon as the distress call hit her ears, her heart skipped a beat. The voice on the other end wasn't speaking a language she knew, but the tone was unmistakable. Desperation. Her first instinct was to report it to Earth Command. There was protocol for handling such messages, after all. But the more she listened, the more her gut told her this wasn't a message meant for the High Command. This was a call for help that wouldn't reach the right ears unless someone decided to act. The Virelians weren't allies of humanity. In fact, they had been enemies at times. Their fleet had been feared for centuries. Now, they were asking for assistance. Lillian leaned forward, rubbing her temples. Earth Command was sure to dismiss this message. The Virelians had made it clear in the past they wanted nothing to do with humans, and despite their previous power, their situation was bleak. The message wasn't just a call for help, it was a warning. If the Virelian fleet fell, the Tralzians would move forward, sweeping through unprotected territories. And the Tralzians were not an enemy anyone could take lightly. The Tralzians were ancient and ruthless, destroyers of worlds. Once they set their eyes on a target, nothing survived. If the Virelians lost this fight, the ripple effect could be disastrous. Lillian stared at the screen, torn. She had served in the military long enough to know that saving the Virelians wasn't part of humanity's long-term plan. There would be no glory, no gain. It was too dangerous. The risk of failure was enormous. But there was something about the desperation in the Virelians' message that wouldn't let her go. The silent plea for survival. The threat of what would happen if they fell. She stood up from her chair and walked to the window, her thoughts racing. She wasn't naive. She knew what would happen if she chose to act. She would be disobeying orders. She would be going against everything that the Earth Command expected of her. But humanity was different. Humans had been at the edge of extinction not long ago. They knew what it felt like to be written off by the galaxy. Lion remembered the early years of Earth's space exploration, the time when humans were nothing more than a nuisance to the powerful races. Now they had come so far. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to repay the favor. With a deep breath, she made her decision. She turned on her comms and contacted her closest officers, volunteers, all of them. They had always trusted her, and now she needed them more than ever. She knew they wouldn't hesitate. The message was clear. They weren't just going to sit by and watch as another species, no matter how proud or powerful, face total annihilation. Not when there was a chance to help. Within hours, the Starhammer, a warship far from its prime but still formidable, was ready for launch. Lion had to act quickly. The Virelian fleet was on the verge of collapse, and every minute counted. The mission would be dangerous. No, it would be a miracle if they even reached the fleet in time. But the human crew aboard the Starhammer weren't known for their hesitance. They were known for doing the impossible. They were known for acting when others wouldn't. And Lion wasn't about to let the Virelians die without a fight. The ship's engines roared to life, and they were off, headed toward a danger few could even comprehend. As they traveled through the cold expanse, Lion couldn't shake the feeling that this mission would change everything. It wouldn't just be a matter of saving the Virelian fleet. It would be a test of humanity's resolve, of their strength to face the unknown, to stand against the tides of destruction that threatened to consume them all. Hours turned into days as the Starhammer sped toward the last known location of the Virelian fleet. The crew moved in a quiet intensity, preparing for what they were about to face. Some tried to relax, but the tension was thick in the air. The unknown loomed large in everyone's mind. Could they even make it in time? Could they defeat the Tralzians, who were no strangers to brutal warfare? When they finally arrived at the coordinates, what they saw was worse than anyone had expected. The Virelian fleet, once a symbol of power, was now a ghost. Ships drifted in space, their lights flickering weakly. The once proud vessels had become derelict, their hulls riddled with damage. It was clear the Tralzians had already made their move. The fleet was on the verge of total collapse. But Lion wasn't ready to give up yet. The humans didn't come all this way to witness destruction. They came to act. It was time to fight. Her voice cut through the quiet of the ship, issuing commands that echoed through the halls. The Starhammer would shield the Virelian ships. It would protect them and give them a chance to escape. It wasn't just about survival now. It was about showing that humanity could make a difference, that humans could be counted on in times of need. With the Virelians on the brink of despair, Lion knew one thing for sure: this was only the beginning. The Starhammer had entered the fray, and nothing would be the same again. Whether they survived or not, one thing was certain: humanity's answer to the call for help would resonate across the galaxy. It would change everything. Commander Lion Graves stood in the command center of the Starhammer, staring at the flickering image of the Virelian fleet. The silence in the room was thick as her crew worked in tense concentration, monitoring the situation. The stars outside their ship were a distant, uncaring sea of light. Yet, the pain of what they were witnessing came through clearly. The once proud Virelians, who had conquered galaxies and ruled vast star systems, were now nothing more than a dying fleet in the face of the Tralzians, an ancient and ruthless enemy. Each passing moment, their chance of survival grew slimmer. The Tralzians were known for their merciless ways. No mercy, no negotiations, just destruction. And yet, the Virelians were begging for something that humanity had never been asked for: help. The distress signal had come through hours ago, filling the crew of the Starhammer with unease. Despite the Virelian fleet's past hostilities with humanity, the message was clear: they were in trouble. The Tralzians had them trapped near a dying star, their ships heavily damaged, systems failing, and no way out. Commander Lion couldn't shake the feeling that if they didn't act, the galaxy might fall into chaos. The Tralzians would push forward and devastate everything in their path. The galaxy would be thrown into another dark age, one where hope was extinguished. Yet there was no question that humanity had no real reason to help. Earth Command would never approve a rescue mission. The Virelians were too proud, too distant. There would be no reward for helping them. No political gain, no benefit. The mission had risk written all over it. No one would care if they failed. But Lion couldn't ignore what the message meant. If she didn't act, the galaxy might be overrun. It wasn't just about saving the Virelians. It was about stopping the Tralzians, about protecting the future of the galaxy. She paced the command center, her mind racing. The Starhammer was an old warship, far from the cutting-edge technology of the newer fleets. Its engines were strong, but outdated. Its weapons were reliable, but they hadn't seen battle in years. Could they even fight off the Tralzians long enough to give the Virelians a chance? Lion knew that her ship and its crew would be outmatched. The Tralzians were ruthless, well-equipped, and they had no mercy. But it wasn't about just fighting. It was about doing what was right. Humanity had always been the underdog, always been overlooked by the greater powers. They had risen against the odds before, and perhaps this was another chance for them to prove that they would do the right thing, no matter the cost. She took a deep breath and looked at her officers. They were watching her now, waiting for her decision. "Commander," Lieutenant Jace whispered, his voice heavy with hesitation. "We're only a small force. The Virelians, they're our enemies. Can we really risk everything for them?" Lion turned to face him, her gaze firm. The doubt in his voice mirrored her own thoughts, but her decision had already begun to take shape. "Lieutenant," she began, her voice calm but resolute, "we're not doing this for the Virelians. We're doing this because the Tralzians will come for all of us if we don't. If they win this, they'll sweep through everything. It won't matter who's an ally or an enemy. We'll all be next. We don't get to decide who lives or dies in this galaxy. Not anymore." Jace nodded, his face a mix of uncertainty and determination. He understood. Lion didn't expect them to understand entirely. This wasn't a decision that could be easily explained. It wasn't about politics, it wasn't about revenge, and it certainly wasn't about anything that made sense in a typical military strategy. This was about survival, about stopping a greater threat before it was too late. The Starhammer wasn't ready for such a battle, but it would have to be. The crew would need to work together like never before. Lion turned to the rest of her team. "We leave immediately. Full speed ahead." The room buzzed with the sound of orders being relayed and engines powering up. The crew moved with purpose, though each knew the risks. But despite the fear, despite the doubt, they were humans. And if there was one thing humanity knew how to do, it was fight. The decision was made. There was no turning back now. The Starhammer slipped out of the docking bay and shot through the darkness of space toward the Virelian fleet. As they neared the coordinates of the distress signal, the sight that awaited them was worse than Lion could have imagined. The once imposing Virelian ships now drifted in space like fallen giants, their hulls battered and broken. There were no signs of life coming from many of the ships. Some were still firing weakly in defense, but others had long since fallen silent. The Tralzian fleet, dark and menacing, hovered just beyond their reach, their ships glowing ominously as they prepared for the final strike. Leon's stomach twisted. They were too late. The Virelians were on the verge of collapse, and without immediate intervention, the Tralzians would crush them. Humanity's arrival was their last hope. Lion swallowed her fear and gave the order to engage. "Deploy shields. Weapons ready. All crews, prepare for battle." As the Starhammer powered its way into the heart of the battle, the human crew worked together like a finely tuned machine. Their teamwork was swift, decisive, and relentless. Each officer on board knew their role and carried it out without hesitation. They would hold the line, no matter the cost. They would give the Virelians a chance to escape, to regroup, to survive. For the first time in her life, Lion could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She wasn't just leading her crew into battle. She was fighting for the future of the galaxy. There was no guarantee they would make it through this, but they had made the right choice. They had decided to stand against a threat that could destroy everything. It wasn't about whether they would succeed. It was about showing the galaxy that humanity would not back down, no matter the odds. The battle raged on, with the Starhammer taking the brunt of the attacks, its shields absorbing the blows from the Tralzians, while Lion's crew fought with everything they had. The Virelian ships, battered and struggling, slowly began to power up. Some responded to the humans' actions by firing their weapons at the Tralzians, adding their firepower to the battle. Together, they fought with renewed strength. As the hours passed, Lion found herself caught between hope and doubt. She knew they couldn't keep this up forever. The Starhammer was outgunned and outnumbered, and the Tralzians would keep coming. But as long as they fought, they could make a difference. And that was all that mattered. The decision had been made, and they were in it together. There would be no turning back, no regrets. The galaxy was watching, waiting for the outcome of this unexpected alliance. But Commander Lion Graves didn't care. She had made her choice, and she knew that no matter what happened next, humanity would stand tall. Captain Samara Albright sat in the dimly lit command room of the Eclipse, her fingers hovering over the controls. Outside, The stars stretched endlessly into the vast unknown, a sight she had seen countless times before. But today, it felt different. Today, the eclipse was about to reach the edge, an uncharted region of space, untouched by any known civilization. There were rumors, whispers of strange occurrences, and mysterious signals. Some believe it to be the boundary of the galaxy, a place where nothing should exist. Others said it was the heart of something ancient, waiting to be discovered. But no one truly knew what lay beyond. Samara's heart raced as she stared at the readouts in front of her. They were nearly there. The coordinates had been given to her by a source she trusted only reluctantly. An old friend, now a fugitive. He had insisted that she had to be the one to go, that only the eclipse could survive what lay ahead. She had argued with him, of course. It was crazy. No one had ever dared to venture this far, and for good reason. But the old man had insisted, his voice full of dread. "You don't understand, Samara. It's not just about discovery. It's about survival. The galaxy needs someone to make it back with the truth." As the eclipse edged closer to the mysterious region, Samara couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Her crew, a mix of the best and brightest humanity had to offer, was with her. But even they were nervous. The unknown had a way of creeping into the minds of even the most seasoned explorers. Every crew member had heard the stories. The disappearances, the strange signals, the ships that had entered and never returned. It wasn't supposed to be like this. They were explorers, driven by curiosity, seeking knowledge to push the boundaries of what was known. Yet, as the eclipse sailed toward the edge, that curiosity was overshadowed by an unshakable sense of dread. "Captain, the edge of the zone is just ahead," Lieutenant Harris called from his station. His voice was steady, but Samara could hear the tension in it. "We're receiving some interference. The sensors are starting to glitch." Samara nodded but said nothing. She wasn't surprised. They had expected this. The closer they got, the more erratic the readings had become. No one could explain it. The region beyond the edge didn't follow the usual laws of space and time. Ships that ventured too far and either vanished or came back. Wrong. Sometimes their crews were lost. Sometimes they returned with memories wiped clean, and other times they simply returned different, changed. What had happened to those crews? Samara didn't want to think about it. "We'll press on," Samara said, her voice firm despite the unease gnawing at her. "Adjust the shields. Prepare for anything." The crew worked quickly, securing the ship as they neared the unknown. Samara's mind raced, wondering if this was the right decision, if there was even a way back. They were so close. It was too late to turn back now. As the ship passed into the mysterious region, the stars ahead began to warp. The space around them twisted, as if they were being pulled into another dimension. The ship shook violently, as though struggling against an invisible force. Samara gripped the armrests of her seat, fighting the nausea that threatened to overtake her. The lights flickered, and the hum of the engines became erratic, growing louder and louder until it was almost deafening. "Captain, something's wrong," Harris shouted. His hands flew over the controls, trying to stabilize the ship, but nothing worked. The eclipse was caught in a gravitational pull, and there was no way to escape it. Suddenly, the shaking stopped. The ship came to a halt, suspended in an eerie calm. The lights returned to normal, and the noise faded, but the silence that followed was even more unnerving. Outside the viewports, nothing seemed to make sense. The stars were gone. The black void that had once been space was now a swirling vortex of colors that defied all logic. Time itself felt like it had slowed down, as if the eclipse was trapped in a moment that stretched on forever. "What is this place?" Samara whispered, her voice barely audible. Before anyone could respond, a figure appeared on the view screen. It was not a person, but something other. It was a swirling mass of energy, shimmering in a kaleidoscope of colors. It pulsed with life, its form shifting and changing, as if it were made of pure thought. Samara stared, unable to look away. The figure's presence filled the entire command room, and for a brief moment, she felt as if it were inside her mind. "Welcome," the figure said. The voice was not human, nor did it seem to come from any one source. It reverberated in their heads, echoing in the very core of their being. Samara's heart skipped a beat. "Who are you?" "I am the guardian of the edge," the figure replied. "You have crossed the threshold. Few have done so and lived to tell the tale. But now, you must face the truth." "The truth?" Samara echoed, her voice shaky. "What truth?" The figure's form shifted again, and this time, Samara saw images flash before her eyes. Visions of a forgotten war, of ancient civilizations rising and falling, and of a power beyond comprehension. "The truth is that this region of space is not merely a void. It is the remnants of what came before, a place where the first beings of the galaxy were born. It is a place of unimaginable knowledge and power, but it is also dangerous. Those who seek it may not return as they were. Some are consumed by it. Others are altered, their minds shattered by the weight of what they learn." The room went silent. The crew looked at one another, fear in their eyes. Samara felt a chill run down her spine. They had come seeking answers, but now they were confronted with the impossible. The edge wasn't just a place. It was a warning, a reminder of the galaxy's forgotten history. "Why did you bring us here?" Samara asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You came seeking knowledge," the guardian said. "But knowledge has a price. Those who dare to enter must decide whether they are ready to pay it. Some have come seeking power, others wisdom, but all have left changed. Will you leave with the truth, or will you leave with something far worse?" Samara felt her pulse quicken. The choice was before her. The truth was tantalizing, but the price was unknown, and the danger was real. Would they leave with knowledge that could save humanity, or would they become another casualty of the edge? The decision weighed heavily on her. "We must leave," Samara said finally, her voice firm. She knew the risks, and she knew the temptation, but they couldn't afford to let curiosity blind them. Set course back to the galaxy. Now, as the eclipse turned, the swirling vortex began to shift again, and the figure disappeared. Silence followed, and the crew breathed a collective sigh of relief. They had survived, this time. But Samara knew that what they had seen would stay with them forever. They had crossed the edge, and though they were leaving, they were not the same as they had been before. The galaxy was waiting, unaware of the decision made at the edge. But Samara knew that humanity would face the consequences of their curiosity sooner or later. The truth they had encountered was not something they could ignore. It was only a matter of time before the secrets of the edge would come calling again. Captain Ethan Drake stood at the bridge of the Starfire, his eyes locked on the screen as the distant stars flickered ominously. The quiet hum of the engines was the only sound that filled the room, yet an uneasy tension hung thick in the air. He could feel it. Something was wrong. The mission had started out simple enough, a routine scouting mission to the outer reaches of the galaxy. But as they ventured farther from known space, the sensors had begun to pick up strange anomalies, and now they were trapped in an unknown part of space, surrounded by forces they couldn't even comprehend. There was no way to reach the fleet. They were on their own. Ethan's mind raced. The crew of the Starfire was a small one, but they were skilled. They had navigated through dangerous missions before, but this time it was different. The ship had been hit by some kind of unknown energy pulse. The shields were failing, and the communications were down. The ship itself seemed to be shaking under an unseen force. The gravity was fluctuating, making it difficult to move in some parts of the ship, while in others, it felt like they were being pushed down by an invisible weight. This wasn't just a malfunction. This was something far worse. "Captain, we need to make a decision," Lieutenant Harper called out, her voice tense. She was standing at the comm station, trying to send out a distress signal. "I've tried everything. Nothing's getting through. We're completely cut off from the fleet." Ethan clenched his fists, his mind running through their options. They were surrounded by a strange force field, unlike anything they had encountered before. They couldn't go forward. The Starfire was too slow, and with the shields down, they'd be sitting ducks. Their best chance was to escape, but how? There was no escape without knowing what they were facing. "We'll have to fight our way out," Ethan said, his voice firm, though even he wasn't sure it was the right decision. "Prepare the crew for combat. We need to find the source of this interference and neutralize it." Harper nodded. "Understood, Captain." The crew scrambled into action, gathering their weapons, securing the ship, and preparing for the unknown. Ethan took a deep breath. He had seen his share of battles, but this felt different. They were outmatched. They didn't know who or what they were fighting. As they moved toward the central control room, the ship groaned as another pulse hit them, shaking the walls. "Captain!" Engineer Ramirez shouted from the lower deck. "The engine's power systems are almost completely drained. We're running on emergency reserves. If we don't get the power back online, we won't have enough fuel to escape." "Where's the source of the disturbance?" Ethan asked, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. Ramirez glanced over his shoulder, worry in his eyes. "It's coming from ahead, directly in our path. I think it's a massive energy field. We're being drawn toward it. How do we fight that?" Ethan muttered, his thoughts racing. They were being pulled into a trap, a deadly force field that was draining their power, and they were too far from any help. If they didn't act fast, they would be stuck, helpless. "We don't," Ramirez said quietly. "But we can try to overload the engines. A massive burst of energy might break the field's hold, even if it's only for a moment." Ethan nodded grimly. "Do it." The crew worked quickly, moving with the urgency of knowing they didn't have much time. As they neared the source of the disturbance, the ship began to shake again. But this time, it was different. The shaking wasn't from the energy field. It was the sound of something approaching. Something big. "Captain, we're not alone," Harper said urgently, her eyes scanning the view screen. "There's another ship. It's massive. And it's coming straight for us." The ship on the view screen was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was dark, almost ghostly, and seemed to be made of an energy that flickered and pulsed with life. It was as if it didn't belong in this galaxy. The Starfire was no match for such a ship. Their chances of survival were slim. "Full power to the engines," Ethan ordered, his mind working quickly to formulate a plan. "We need to break free now." But as the engines roared to life, the Starfire shuddered violently. It was as if the other ship was toying with them, blocking their every attempt to escape. Then, without warning, the massive ship unleashed a powerful beam of energy, slamming into the Starfire's hull. The impact sent them spiraling. The ship groaned as it fought to stay intact, the walls cracking under the pressure. "We're losing control," Ramirez shouted. "If we don't stabilize now, we'll be destroyed." Ethan gritted his teeth and pushed himself to his feet. He knew they didn't have much time left. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight to escape. They couldn't win this battle with weapons alone. They had to outsmart their enemy. "Harper," Ethan said, his voice steady but urgent, "can we get a signal to that ship?" Harper looked at him, confusion in her eyes. "What are you thinking, Captain?" "Send a message," Ethan said, a glimmer of hope in his voice. "Tell them we'll surrender. We need to buy ourselves some time." Harper's eyes widened in realization. "You think they'll stop?" "It's the only chance we got," Ethan replied. "Send it." Harper quickly typed the message into the console and sent it out. They waited, the seconds dragging on like hours. Then, just as all hope seemed lost, the massive enemy ship stopped. The energy pulses halted, and for a brief moment, the Starfire was left in eerie silence. The enemy ship had received their message. They hadn't expected it to work, but it did. "Now, Ramirez, overload the engines," Ethan shouted, his voice sharp. "We need to make a run for it. fast. As they neared the facility, the sound of distant footsteps caught Aaron's attention. He motioned for his team to stop. The footsteps grew louder. Then, suddenly, they saw them. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, a man and 2 aliens, their bodies covered in scars and strange markings. The man, a human, was leaning heavily on one of the aliens, clearly injured. The other alien appeared to be supporting him, while the third stood a few steps behind, scanning the area warily. Aaron's heart raced. This was no ordinary group of survivors. The aliens were not hostile, yet there was something unnerving about the way they moved. They looked like they were ready for a fight at any moment, yet there was an air of mutual trust between them that made no sense. "Who are you?" Aaron asked, stepping forward cautiously. The human, struggling to stand, looked up at him with weary eyes. "Captain Aaron Holt," he asked weakly. "We've been waiting for you. We have a message." Aaron's mind raced. How could they know who he was? He hadn't even sent out a distress signal yet. Before he could speak, the injured man continued. "We're not the only ones left," the human said, his voice filled with urgency. "The Tralzians, they've already invaded the fleet's sector. They're coming here too. We need to stop them before it's too late." Aaron's eyes narrowed. "How do you know all this? What's your connection to the Tralzians?" The human looked at the 2 aliens, then back at Aaron. "We've been tracking them," he said. "They wiped out our fleet, but we survived. These 2, they're Tralzians, but they're different." The aliens, who had been standing in the shadows, stepped forward. The one who had been supporting the injured human spoke, his voice deep and almost melodic. "We are deserters," he said, his words heavily accented but clear. "The Tralzians have no honor. We were once soldiers in their ranks, but we have seen their cruelty. We left them, and now we fight for something else." Aaron's eyes widened in disbelief. A defector, a Tralzian deserter. It was unheard of. The Tralzians were known for their ruthless loyalty to their cause, but here were 2 who had turned against their own people. "We can help you," the deserter continued. "We know their tactics, their weaknesses, but we need you to trust us." Aaron's mind whirled. It was a gamble, but this was their only chance. The Tralzians were ruthless, and they needed all the help they could get. "All right," he said, his voice firm. "We'll work together. But make no mistake, we're in this together now. If you betray us, there will be no mercy." The deserter nodded solemnly. "We understand, Captain." And so a new bond was forged, a bond born of necessity, trust, and the hope that they could stop the Tralzians before they wiped out everything. Aaron knew the road ahead would be perilous, but with these new allies, they might just stand a chance. As they made their way back to the vanguard, the human and the 2 deserters shared their knowledge of the Tralzians, revealing critical weaknesses in their battle tactics and fleet operations. They had the upper hand now, but Aaron knew they couldn't waste any time. The enemy was closing in, and the fight for survival was about to begin. Ramirez didn't hesitate. He pulled the emergency lever, and the Starfire's engines flared with a brilliant, blinding light. The ship's systems groaned under the strain, but it was enough. The field surrounding them began to crack, and for the first time since they entered this strange, dangerous part of space, the Starfire broke free. "Full speed ahead," Ethan commanded. "Head for the edge of the disturbance. We don't stop until we're out of here." The crew worked in perfect unison, the adrenaline pushing them forward. The Starfire shot toward the edge of the energy field, the massive ship slowly fading into the distance behind them. Just as they thought they were safe, a final pulse of energy hit the Starfire, sending it into a spiral. But they held on, fighting the uncontrollable forces, and finally, with a tremendous burst, the Starfire shot out of the energy field and into open space. They were free. For now. Ethan leaned back in his seat, sweat dripping from his brow. He looked around at his crew, each of them battered, but alive. The Starfire had survived, but the battle wasn't over. They had escaped, but what they had learned, what they had seen, would haunt them forever. There was more to this galaxy than they could ever imagine, and the fight to survive was just beginning. The air was thick with tension as Captain Aaron Holt paced back and forth in the command center of the Vanguard, his thoughts running wild. The mission had seemed straightforward at first. Rendezvous with the distant Alliance fleet on the Outer Rim and join forces to fend off a growing alien threat. But as they approached the rendezvous point, things had gone terribly wrong. The fleet they were supposed to meet had vanished. No sign of distress, no warning, just empty space where they should have been. Then came the signal, the strange, distorted transmission. It was weak, but unmistakable. Help, the Tralzians. They are coming. Aaron's brow furrowed as he glanced at the holomap that floated in front of him. The Tralzians. They were a mysterious race, known for their swift, devastating raids on neutral worlds. They were brutal, efficient, and left no survivors. Everyone had heard the rumors, but no one had ever seen them up close, until now. "We're too late," Lieutenant Marla Quinn said from her station, her voice barely a whisper. "The fleet's been wiped out." Aaron didn't need her to confirm it. He already knew. The ghostly traces of their last communication were all they had left, and they were rapidly fading. The Vanguard was alone in this corner of space, and the Tralzians were coming. He could feel it in his bones. "We need to find them," Aaron muttered, though even he wasn't sure how. "There has to be something, anything, that can tell us where they went." The crew of the Vanguard worked quickly, scanning the area for any signs of the enemy, but it was like searching for a needle in a haystack. Just as Aaron was about to give the order to move forward, something unexpected happened. A new signal, faint but unmistakable, flashed across their screens. It wasn't from the fleet. It wasn't from any human ship. It was an alien signal, but one he didn't recognize. "Captain," Marla said, her voice tinged with disbelief, "I'm getting something strange. A life signal. 3 entities, unregistered, on a nearby planet. They're alive." Aaron's eyes narrowed. Could it be survivors from the fleet? Marla hesitated. "I don't know. But they're out there, and they need help." The decision was made instantly. They couldn't risk losing any more lives, even if they didn't know who or what these survivors were. Aaron ordered the ship to divert course and head to the coordinates. It was a gamble. There was no telling who or what they might find. But they had no choice. If there was any chance of stopping the Tralzians, they needed to act now. As the Vanguard descended through the planet's atmosphere, a sense of unease settled over the crew. The landscape below was harsh, unforgiving. A barren wasteland with jagged mountains and vast, empty deserts. There was no sign of civilization, no signs of life, except for the small group they were headed toward. Landing on the surface, Aaron led a team of soldiers down to the planet's surface. The air was thick with dust, and the ground was cracked and dry. They moved quickly, their boots crunching on the dirt, eyes scanning every shadow for any signs of danger. The signal was coming from a small outpost on the edge of the desert, a facility that appeared to have been abandoned long ago.